Hey, Archie, if I decide to downsize my house when I retire, does it ever make sense to keep my old house and rent it?
Maybe, but maybe not. Let's dive in. I'm Archie Hoxton.
And I'm Rob Hoxton.
And this is Last Paycheck, weekly wisdom to help you retire and stay that way. Welcome back to the Last Paycheck Podcast, brought to you by Hoxton Planning and Management. We're your hosts, CFP professionals, Archie Hoxton and Rob Hoxton. And today, we're going to talk about weighing what to do with your house when you retire. There's a couple of different, investment strategies you can take as far as your real estate is concerned. And so we're looking at a couple options that people often compare and coming up with some.
And this is an strategy. Interesting twist on a question that we've been getting asked for all 32 years, I think, that we've been in practice. It's a little bit different. It came from a client, super interesting scenario. So it's this couple, they've been, careful savers throughout their entire working life. They've lived well below their means, and, they're in a position to be able to have a great retirement financially. And they're interested in maybe having less house.
Yeah.
And because they always want to work things, whatever deal they're working on, in an optimized way, they asked, Rob, if we downsize, what if we kept the house that we've lived in all these years and become landlords and rent that and use that income to augment our retirement income? And like any good financial planner, I answered them very quickly with, well, that depends, right? So, and it does depend. It depends on a lot of things, least of which are the finances of it, and I think we should just maybe touch on what some of those things are. So, the environment that we find ourselves in right now while we're recording this podcast is one where we've had, fairly high inflation, but it's really come down.
Mm-hmm.
And it looks like interest rates have been high as well. Mortgage rates were up close to 8%. And now they're starting to drop. And, the Fed is talking about cutting rates, so we should see rates come down. But even still, people who've had their homes for a while and had mortgages have really attractive mortgage rates.
Yeah.
So as we've had inflation, home prices have risen, right?
Mm-hmm.
You know all too well, having bought a house a year or two ago.
Mm-hmm.
So house prices have gone up, but so have rents.
Right.
So it's pretty cool that this client is thinking, I have a low mortgage payment and rents are high. This might be a really attractive sort of scenario to get into the rental business.
Right.
And it's hard to argue that until we really get into some of the facts.
Absolutely. There's a lot. There are a lot of things to consider. Like you said, the financial piece of it. There are, some really, really important considerations, right? Here's an example. Let's say you've had your house for 30 years and it has appreciated by $500,000. Since you've been in it for longer than 5 years, and you have a $500,000 capital gain on it, since it's your primary residence, you can sell it, realize the gain, and pocket all that money. You don't actually have to pay tax on it.
That's
because
if you're
it's
married.
An exclusion. Yeah, if you're married.
Yeah.
It's half of that if you're not.
And you've lived at least 2 of the last 5 years in it, I think is the way the rule works.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And so if you go with this strategy, you would be potentially, if this is a long-term strategy and you'd go 5 years and not any 2 of those 5, that was your primary because you're renting it, you could be sacrificing that huge tax benefit. And so the question becomes...
Because the house becomes, right, a commercial property, right, a rental property. You switch from the way that your house has always been treated from a tax standpoint to one in which you're taking depreciation expense each year and it becomes more complicated.
Right.
And you could potentially, as you said, give up the benefit of that capital gain. Now, you might get it again in the new house that you buy.
Right. You would if you stay in this house a long time and it appreciates over the course of your retirement. Of course, at that point, if this is your final house, maybe your children inherit it and they get a step up in basis. So there is no gain anymore. All of this, there's a lot of big question marks about it, but that's one that comes to mind for me is you have to make sure that the appreciation in the new house and the internal rate of return on renting the other one, basically, as long as you are doing this long enough, at what point do you break even and you make more than you would have made on your savings and on the capital gains?
Yeah, and if you're going to keep the house and buy another house, of course, you've got to come up with a down payment on the other house, which should be at least 20%.
Right.
You got to make sure that you're comfortable with the idea of having a mortgage. Of course, the mortgage you're going to get today may have a higher rate than the mortgage on your existing home.
Right.
You want to make sure that your total housing costs aren't more than 25% of your expected retirement income, just as a good rule of thumb.
Right.
So there are certainly other considerations. And don't forget that all of those expenses that you've had on your current home are going to be your responsibility as the landlord too, right?
Yeah, that's a great point. Now you've got the cost of owning two homes. You're getting rent, so that there can mitigate. But if something happens to that original house that maybe wouldn't have happened when you were the primary resident,
like the tenants are harder on the house than you would have been because they don't own it.
Right.
Yeah.
All that eats into your rate of return that you're earning. If you're looking at this as strictly a financial investment, strategy, you have to think about everything that eats into your rate of return, and that's unexpected expenses, wear and tear, higher maintenance costs, more frequent maintenance, and all that. Much of that depends on the quality of the tenant.
Yeah, it is so hard. And I always hear so many stories. I haven't enjoyed being a landlord. I have been a couple of times, but you hear so many stories about, the tenants from hell, so to speak. I had one client who rented their house. They did precisely this. They were actually not downsizing, but the husband got a really great job offer in another city, in another part of the country. And so they took that deal and that job and moved out, but they knew all along that they wanted to probably retire back to this area, right?
Yeah.
So they didn't want to sell the house, so they rented it. And so they were going to be long distance, so they rented it and used a property manager, which was an additional cost,
right?
Which ate into the rent that they received. And the property manager did what he could to screen the tenants, and you're pretty limited as to what you can do screening tenants because of you don't want to run awry of discrimination rules or anything. And they found a really nice couple, good credit, as I recall, and they moved in. But they also, and it was a 2,200 square foot Cape Cod house, and they moved in. But what they didn't know is that they had 7 children. And they were just crammed in every corner. And so even though the tenants apparently were nice people, they just wore the house out.
Yeah.
And so they ended up having to replace an HVAC system much sooner than they thought they were going to. They ended up having to repaint because the HVAC system couldn't absorb the amount of moisture in the air from that many people taking showers. You don't think of these things.
Yeah.
And so they had these massive expenses that far outweighed the amount of income that they received in rent. And so even if you have well-meaning tenants that aren't malicious in the way they treat your property, it's something you have to take into consideration. The other thing that he mentioned that he didn't really take into consideration was that now that it's a rental property, the way that property taxes are levied are much higher, right? So if it's personal residence, and it probably depends on your location, but if it's personal residence, you have taxes at one level. But if it's a rental property, a commercial operation, that rate is higher.
Yeah.
And also, you still have to have liability insurance and property insurance on it. Now that it's a commercial property, well, those premiums are higher. So there are all of these financial things that come into play, not to mention the non-financial things like this is your home. Maybe this is the home that you raised your children in.
Yeah.
Right? And so there's like a heart connection to that property. And when somebody moves into that doesn't have that connection, are you going to be okay with that?
Yeah. And I also think it's important when you're looking at investing in real estate. It's important to take a step back, not necessarily invest on what I would call it investing on happenstance. This happens to be your home and you happen to be able to rent it out, and then move to a new place. But maybe that's not objectively the best rental property, right? Maybe it wouldn't be something, if you see what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. It's where you happen to be rather than going out and finding the best rental property you can. So, and working with someone a property manager and a realtor who have some experience in this, and going somewhere and say, okay, I have no sentimental value here, and this is objectively a better property for the market rate, for the price, what rent I can earn on it. And maybe going with that rather than just what you already happen to own. And you can always roll that in. You can you could sell it, get the capital gain, and then buy that. And then you could, figure out what to do from there. So I think it's important not to, just, like I said, just invest on happenstance.
Yeah, I mean, if you were in the market and being very deliberate about buying a rental property, it probably wouldn't be the same property that has been your home for many years. And as you were saying that, I thought about the scenario where the home that you have that you want to rent has a swimming pool.
Mm-hmm.
So is your tenant going to take care of that swimming pool, or are you going to go back and it's going to be like the swampy lagoon with, creatures growing in it? So, yeah, I mean, it's really complicated. And the other thing you have to also consider is, in order to pull this off, if you have to have a mortgage in retirement, I mean, is that something you're equipped to do? I mean, a lot of our clients are trying to position themselves, even though it may not be the best financial move, they're trying to position themselves to have less financial stress, and that means having less debt.
Yes, and picture this. I mean, you can imagine you still have a mortgage on your first place. And this is where I would say this, in my opinion, and this is just my opinion, this kind of falls apart right here. If you have a mortgage on your primary residence, and then you're going to keep that mortgage, rent it out, and the rent covers the mortgage, take out a second mortgage to get the downsized house, then you've got two mortgages. So if you have a lapse where you've got kind of a dry spell and you can't find a tenant for a few months or worse, then you're on the hook for two mortgage payments. To me, that's basically it. There goes your return for a while. Do
you
almost
need that stress?
Yeah, it's too much stress. When you could sell it, downsize, invest the difference, and earn a rate of return, and it doesn't require potentially hiring a property manager or
going in and unplugging the stopped up toilet yourself. Yeah. I mean, golly, that just doesn't work for me.
So I mean, I think this can make sense. It's hard to get on a podcast and say this is what you should do, because it always depends on your personal circumstances. I think we've kind of tried to lay out, here's some ways, some circumstances that it could work. Here's some where it might not. These are the things you need to consider if you're thinking about it.
Yeah.
Watch out for too much debt. Make sure that you're not going to have a hard time letting someone who doesn't care about your home where you raise your family in and letting them, treat it however they will. Making sure you're making the objectively best rental property investment decision too. I mean, I think that's important as well.
If you're feeling emotional about it, talk to somebody who can help you make a smart decision. That's what financial planners do.
Yeah, absolutely. That's what we are here for. So I think that probably just about covers everything that we're going to talk about today. But if you like this, remember to leave us a like and a comment, subscribe, hit the bell for notifications. We release a new episode every Wednesday. And then reach out. We've got our number here. If you've got questions, text us, call us. And yeah, that about covers it. So we hope to see you next time. You've been watching Last Paycheck, weekly wisdom to help you retire and stay that way. If you like this show, be sure to hit like and subscribe. Last Paycheck is available anywhere you get your podcasts.